I'm resident of Collinwood for YouTube. Joel Sains. I'm joined by my buddy Gordon Dymowski, my buddy Patrick McCray, my buddy Don Schmidt. We're here to pay tribute to the late Mark Goddard, sorry, who played Major West on the original Lost in Space. So I watched 2 episodes that Patrick recommended today. They were really good. I also watched the first season when I was a kid. So you guys more remember Lost in Space than I do. We'll start with Dawn.
Oh God.
What's when you compare like the character Mark Goddard played to other television hero characters, where does his character rank come on for you?
Are you talking about different shows, Jewel, or different?
Yeah, like because you guys grew up with the original Lost in Space. I did not. So that's sort of where I'm sort of looking outside looking in.
Compared to other, well, I just have to give you context. So I remember the last season when I was 4 or 5 years old, and at that time we were right in the middle of the Apollo program. We had gone from Gemini. That's why they called in this pilot they called the Jupiter 2 the Gemini 12, I assume. So I'm seeing him as, evolved into the astronaut because he was the pilot of the Jupiter 2. And I always kind of thought, he was angry, kind of a warrior. He was just kind of, I don't know, it's just different than anything else that was on TV. I know that sounds like a simplistic answer, but I kind of thought of him as a kid. I'm looking, as this is at the 4 or 5-year-old, is kind of a warrior and fighter and protector of the Robinson family. That's how I thought of him, kind of a badass astronaut as a kid. That's, it's apples and oranges, but that's just how there was nobody like, there was no other character like that. Maybe you can compare it with, somebody on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, maybe, but there was nobody else like him, that character on TV at the time.
Roger Healy. What if Roger Healy had been on the Jupiter 2? Wouldn't that have been great?
Oh boy, I don't know. I think.
Well, how about Bob Hartley? Let's just go there. What if it were Bob Hartley?
Or Howard Borden? He was a pilot. And what was this thing about Bill Daly playing pilots?
He was part of the Mile High Club.
Oh, no. All right. But having that astronaut hero, sort of that sort of Major Matt Mason kind of figure, it's missed in TV today. Everybody's got to have some sort of edge or a different kind of edge, some kind of regret. That's one of the things I really like about Strange New Worlds is that Strange New Worlds is a show that I think Don West would have fit very, very, very well in as a character. Because, he likes his job. He likes doing what he's doing. It's just Smith all the time with you, Smith. That's the problem. But, Space Primordials, or Space Primevals, he gets over that, which I love.
And the thing is, the role he serves is that he's basically with his family because they're like, you got a professor, his wife. They're like 3 kids. One is, two are women. One's a boy, a robot, and a simpering guy who loves alliteration. And you need, Mark Goddard played a kind of stock 60s character. I mean, I'm going to use a Dark Shadows term here. He's like the Burke Devlin character of Lost in Space, if that makes sense. He's kind of the, he's the, I'm going to go beat people up. I'm going to go be a troublemaker. And I think, and a lot of 60s actors had that kind of rugged, I mean, it's a character type we really don't see because everyone's like jaded and cynical, and but it's like that kind of get stuff done, be brusque, and I'm sure at some point, and if there had been a series 4 of Lost in Space, they would have had Don West throw Zachary Smith out of the airlock because they are just sick of his stuff.
It could be.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
just real quick to echo, and I don't, this is that era of just great freaking television. And Gordon kind of mentioned it last week, that era of 64 to 72, which was the exact years of Bewitched, but I'm not going to digress into that. But I'm going to go back to what Patrick has said in the past. This was a little bit of that suave Mad Men. We are still feeling the Patrick, that says it so eloquently, and I really mean that, Patrick, that we haven't quite let go of Camelot here. It's showing the optimism of Camelot here before we lose it in the floor of the jungles of Vietnam in a few years. And you have this optimism, you have this focus of this character, the suaveness. He's clean cut, he's disciplined, and he has to play bad cop because that's what he's been trained for. He's been trained to pilot this ship and be suspect of anything that's going to hurt the family or the ship, period.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to bring up, is that he is the guy, if you're John Robinson, that if you need there to be a second role model for Will and for Penny and for Judy, that was one of his other qualifications that doesn't get talked about, that he is going to be the backup dad.
Yeah. Let me give you an opinion about it, and I can't prove this, but I think a character that Major West inspired for a show that aired in the 90s was Ben Broder's character in Farscape.
Yeah, Farscape is, first it's on Tubi. It's basically, think of it as Star Trek on acid.
With
Muppets. But no, I mean, I don't think you're wrong, Jewel, because it's a very stock character type.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's and we talk about like shows from that kind of 64 to 72. Part of it was that there was that optimism, and it was also because things were starting to bubble to the surface. You had a lot of escapism. You had the spy craze, which was going on.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's that archetype of the wisecracking, always do right hero. I mean, you see it a little bit in Robert Vaughn's Man from U.N.C.L.E. You see it a little bit in I'm trying to think of some other examples. You see it a little bit in the dynamic between Robert Conrad and Russ Martin on Wild Wild West. It's that it's a point where the studios at this point, like, they had bought into television and were making television. And what they realized is, we don't have to just do theater on stage. And the other thing that helps is Irwin Allen, who is, if Gene Roddenberry is like the great bird of the galaxy, and he has wild ideas, and he wants to write about the social condition, Irwin Allen's basically just, let's just throw a monster at it. I think his ideal audience for his television shows were that, like, kind of middle to early high school male, and I think he knew how to key into that. And I think Mark Goddard's portrayal as Don West goes right to the point of that idea. And I think it's I think it's clear that he's that kind of that wisecracking hero archetype. Especially in this context, because he's protecting a family, he's just not the lead. He's like maybe, well, if Guy Williams and June Lockhart are the leads, he's like the third person in.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm sure that, like, he was giving Jonathan Harris nasty stares every time he stole a scene. So
I get now in real life. I think Mark Goddard was fine with Jonathan.
Yeah.
Partly because I think he realized that Jonathan really brought in the ratings. I mean, he was a prime. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a Jonathan Harris retrospective, but I think Jonathan Harris really, really, really. I don't think there was Lost in Space without him. I really don't. And I think the other actors knew that. I mean, at a certain point, occasionally you might get jealous of that figure, and what a figure it was. But seriously, yeah. This was also, I think it's crucial to point out, this was before Vietnam had made it unfashionable to be a member of the military.
Yes.
My father, who was a semi-hero of the Cuban crisis, in real life, talks about going in 1960 and coming out of the Navy in like 65, 66, and just how his treatment and the interpretation of who he was very different after that. He became went into a psychology master's program at U of L, and that he suddenly was dealing with a world that had completely changed. But the character of Don West was created before that, when it was it was safe to be a hero.
Yeah. The things I learned about Vietnam in history class was how when the soldiers come home, how they were spit on and stuff, really treated poorly. And I just find that crazy, because when you hear about it, it's like, well, how many of them were drafted to Vietnam? I mean,
Yeah, a lot of them weren't, though. And there are a lot of strange stories coming out. It was a very, very, very confusing time, said the person who did not live through it. So I think probably My Lai Massacre really tipped a lot of the scales on that.
Yeah. In Lost in Space, Mark Goddard plays Major West. How influential is his character and Mark himself to, we'll say, future outer space shows, you think?
It would be a long time before I think we would have a type like that, because you start looking at the few outer space shows that we had in the 70s. I would say UFO was of that ilk, kind of went on the air as that went off. But then you followed up with Space in 1999, where Martin Landau just has a migraine for a couple of seasons, and I sort of understand why. But it wouldn't really be, for my money, until you get William Riker, who is this classic space hero. I mean, really, in a lot of ways, Don West is sort of more of a Supermarionation character. He's along the lines of Troy Tempest, or somebody like that, from a Jerry Anderson show, and God bless him for that. But yeah, I remember talking to a friend of mine when Next Generation was maybe in its second season, and how much we appreciated Riker, because he was this classic space hero. This classic, astronaut space hero we hadn't had for a long time. So, I think for a long time, Mark Goddard was the first and last. And honestly, I don't know if we've had that many like him. My God, I'm trying to think through the Star Trek franchises. A little bit Tom Paris, nobody on DS9, a little bit on Babylon 5, I would say. John Sheridan, definitely. And then of course Captain Pike, Anson Mount's Captain Pike. But more few and far between than you'd think.
Yeah, well, I think part of the issue with Lost in Space is that I'm not sure it's perceived as much as a serious science fiction show. Like, I don't know, like with Star Trek, you could argue because it had various permutations that you could say, and because it was kind of the flagship, to pardon the pun, and was meant to be serious. I think there's much more of a critical examination of it. I'm not sure. I mean, I remember watching Lost in Space in my grandmother's basement when I was a kid. Because you had the old TV where you had to turn it on and you had to wait like 5 or 10 minutes for the tube to warm up.
Yeah.
And then you'd have the weird video drum thing, live the new flesh, and a hand would come out and choke you.
I love those days.
But I think, and Irwin Allen had a record of doing this with at least 2 of his shows, because like with Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, the first season was meant to be like a Cold War futuristic spy thriller, but like by season 3 and 4, like every other episode had werewolves.
It was
like
the werewolf.
Not like different monster every week, but like monster now, werewolf next week, monster now, werewolf next week. It was just Irwin Allen. And Lost in Space started serious. I mean, even with the introduction of Dr. Schmidt, because like the first few episodes, he was meant to be like, okay, he's the fly in the ointment, he's a saboteur. But then Harris realized, if I'm going to be this way, I want to have fun with it. I don't want to be nasty guy. I want to be insulting robots, because that's what you have Jonathan Harris to have. You have him insulting robots. You have him making snarky comments in the second season of Freakazoid. But I do think, because Allen's work before he did disaster movies is kind of seen, and I got to be frank, a lot of people see it as like kid stuff, not television drama, not even like good, solid mid-60s television drama, but kid stuff. It's for the kids. I'm not sure that it had the influence that it did. I mean, the only show I could say that was influenced by Lost in Space was Star Trek Voyager. Well, they had Mrs. Columbo because they hired the lead actress. So
they should have hired Catherine Lee Scott. She was in Star
I would watch that. I would watch that.
Sure, that's good TV.
Mm-hmm.
Don?
Well, Mark, this is a great quote from Mark Goddard. He said the show went from science fiction to science fantasy, and I think that was really great. There's a story that in a Jonathan Harris interviewed. It's interesting, Gordon. That was interesting about Irwin Allen. I think he was a showman, and he had a lot of bluster. But the interviews that I've seen, especially from Jonathan Harris, who said, "Oh God, he's coming in," and everybody had to pretend like they were working if they were taking a break. But there was a respect there that kind of like Dan Curtis, that if anybody could make something happen, it was him. And maybe I'm just a fan and I see it through kids' glasses, but these shows were fantastic for their time. And I agree. I don't think he gets the respect or the credit. He had 3 of these shows running on network television at the same time. But anyway, I was just going back to Mark Goddard, science fantasy. And I think I read, because I was trying to get prepared for this, I think I read somewhere that, and don't quote me, that when the 66-67 season came, they had to go up against Batman. And that was supposedly one of the reasons why the thing turned when it did. And I know that Jonathan Harris had said, no, he had talked to, or Irwin Allen came up to him one day, he says, "I know what you're doing." And Jonathan Harris said, "Okay." He said, "Keep doing it.
Do more."
Yes.
My greatest villains were always comic villains. He said, "I know what you're doing. Do more."
Yes. Patrick. So anyway, go ahead.
Yes, Cosgrove, I will take more of your vile slop. It's a Freakazoid quote. But no, and I think, I mean, um, it feels like I'm damning it with faint praise, and I'm not.
No, yeah.
Because Irwin Allen, I think whatever else you can say about him, I mean, it's when you look at the four big shows that he's known for. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea was a serious effort. I mean, it came from a theatrical movie.
Mhm.
It was meant to be like undersea spy stuff. Lost in Space was supposed to be basically Space Family Robinson. The Time Tunnel was like I think the most expensive show of the time. So it was only on for one season. And then when you look at Land of the Giants, I mean, the premise sounds really, when you look at the premise, you go, really? It's like about people in a weird kind of air spaceship end up on a planet which is full of giants. But the world that is created, it's, I'm not sure. It was probably on around the same time that Dark Shadows was doing the parallel time storyline. I think it was like 68, 69 or 69, 70.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not saying that they took the idea, it wasn't just they were really small, but on Earth. It was, there were hints that there was like a dictatorship, certain technology didn't quite work. And I think Alan would always go, okay, well, let's make it fun. Where he didn't do, if Roddenberry was like, okay, we've got to make an important point and, I got to get this done so I can have affairs with secretaries. Or when Alan was like, okay, we got to get to work, but you know what? Let's throw a werewolf in it. Why not?
Yeah.
And that's what you should do in more of your fan fiction, Jewel. Throw werewolves in it. And if you out there at home, you're like writing like a Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte type pastiche or whatever, it takes place in the 18th century, Comedy of Manners, throw a werewolf in it. Trust me, it'll work.
Put a bird on it.
Do you know who puts a lot of werewolves in his work? Patrick McCray. I defy you to read both daybooks and not find a word werewolf once. Just once. He uses it. There are plenty of werewolves. We are pro werewolf.
I wrote a werewolf story once called Predator or Prey. But that's another.
See, there you go. Werewolves, people. They're the storytelling device of the 21st century. Get this program.
I will say the movie Predator would have been better if it had been a werewolf that he had been fighting.
That's Benicio del Toro, Benicio del Toro movie, The Wolfman. There's a werewolf in it.
There's two.
For me, it was a twist. I didn't see it coming when I went to see that film.
It's a good movie.
Oh my God. Is that Alpha Control behind you, Don?
Yes, I got that off the internet. That was from the first episode, which is one of my favorites. It's like being 3 years old all over again. That is that shot of Alpha Control.
Did they get reused in The Reluctant Stowaway?
Yeah. Yeah, it was reused from the pilot. That's correct.
That shot alone gives such a sense of grandeur, such a sense of 20th Century Fox grandeur to the beginning of that. And for me, it really, really helped sell a lot of the first season. That's such a funny thing. Special effects were at such an odd point at that time because we were between this really tremendous sophistication and then, well, what does an asteroid look like? Maybe it looks like a ball of foil thrown at the Jupiter too. Okay, but then you look at the model shots and especially the ones filmed on exteriors where Jupiter 2 is flying over deserts and things like that.
Oh.
And it looks just sumptuous. It looks absolutely the size that it should be.
Yeah, and the movement is just, because I remember some of those shots, and like you would think it's too perfect to be on like fishing line. You know what I mean? It's just it doesn't look like something that's sliding down. It looks like something that's landing.
Yeah, that was all done out in Trona. If you guys read about that, and all those landforms still exist. It was It was perfect. See, that's where I go back. He was a showman. He was the master. I mean, he may not have been the easiest person to get along with, but he got it done. And Patrick, I would just, if you just indulge me just for a second, Joel, I want to add, along with the models and the design, the language. So I wrote this down. When you had Dick Tuffield, that opening shot of the interior of the Jupiter 2, the most sophisticated piece of hardware yet devised by the mind of man, bold in concept, brilliant in execution, most delicate yet most colossal of instruments. You know, for a TV show, that language is pretty good compared to a lot of the crap we hear now. But that's just grumpy old man talking.
No, because it's pure.
Yes.
It is proud and it is pure and it's technology forward in the right way, you know, and it has, like Irwin Allen's work itself, it has no apologies. This is going to be the biggest. This is going to be the best. And
yes.
You can argue what best means, but biggest certainly, and most enthusiastic, absolutely.
Continue to be grumpy, Don. Continue to be grumpy.
Well,
That's what
it's
I'm gonna
just
say. Well, no. Here's the thing. I agree with you, and here's why. I watched 2 shows on television. That's it, and it's because television's just fucking dull.
Ugh.
Now this is now. You watch 2 shows.
As of now, I watched 2 shows.
What are they?
Strange New Worlds and
Naked
Dark Winds.
Attraction. No, what was the other one?
Dark Winds. That's it. That's the 2 shows I watched. Dark Winds. It's on AMC.
Yeah, is that the one that George R. Martin produces that involves indigenous law enforcement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dark Winds.
Those are the 2 I'm watching. That's it. And it's because television is so goddamn dull. There's not. There's too much. I remember when everybody was excited about The Walking Dead. And then it got so long. It's like, how long are you going to stretch this out?
You've got to decompose at some point.
And then it got predictable because it went too long.
Now, Jewel, no, keep going. I have a question for you.
Like, I said to somebody, you know, who was a fan of the comics, they said, what would you do to sort of shock the audience? I said, kill Rick Grimes. Straight up. And I said, because you don't see it coming. If you keep following the comic, and I'm not saying you shouldn't follow it to a degree, but if you keep following it, isn't your product going to get predictable to the point of you know what's going to happen? So what's the sense of me watching it if I can predict it?
Well,
if I can predict what's going to happen on your show, it's just like me going to go see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. When I see, you know, the beautiful girl from Seventh Heaven, and she's the only real protagonist in the cast. It's like, I'll bet $50 she's going to live at the end of this movie. If I can predict that, there's no sense in me really paying attention to your goddamn movie, is there?
Well, Jewel, for a couple of things. One, how dark is your wind? But secondly, my other puerile and fatuous notion is, you're right. And there are times when, and Lost in Space is a tribute to this, television is a ritual. And watching these shows is a ritual. I mean, you know, you're a church-going gent, and that is about ritual. You know, I mean, the pastor doesn't suddenly say, yeah, but this time Jesus didn't get resurrected. Ha, there's a plot twist. No, I mean, it really is. There is something about ritual and TV that is comforting. Now it depends on the type of show you're doing, and you know, Walking Dead's a much grittier program. But you know, there is a kid in me that really likes seeing seeing a hero and seeing a hero return, because that is satisfying on a very different level. And I think that's one of the things Strange New Worlds, certainly the first season had. Second season, I don't know, it makes me a little worried about the next one, because the butter that was on their bread was these people are happy to be at their jobs, and they're happy to be working with each other, and you get to join them. And I like that too. There's room for both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and kind of to jump off of Patrick's comments, I think over the past 30 years, because I'll blame cable for this, I think a couple of things have happened. One is that shows became micro targeted. So like when you're looking at a show like Lost in Space and Star Trek, two different shows with a similar premise, people in a spaceship doing space stuff, you're going for the widest possible audience. You're going for, and whether you, and at the time, that's what you did. You had three networks. You didn't have a lot of real estate. But what happened is in the 80s and 90s, as cable became prevalent, you had channels derived to specific niches. And what happens is that then people who are creating shows and putting stuff on the docket are saying, okay, we're trying to reach this specific slice of the general public. So a show like Lost in Space, there'll be some people who would say it's corny, it's stupid. But I would say, you know what? It's mid-60s television. I would rather watch this than anything else. And I think the other thing too is that, especially in the past, I'd say the past 20 years, we've seen, and there are going to be a couple of words that I find offensive, and I wish people would stop doing them. One is franchise. Lost in Space in the mid-60s was a unique creative endeavor. Now it's a franchise because there's been a movie spinoff and at least two series spinoffs. The other is intellectual property. Studios don't want to try new things. What they want to do is they want that brand recognition. And I think, and the other thing is the increasing use of the word content to describe everything. And what we've lost is that everything is so driven by demographics, by advertising, by even with streaming, it's how do we get the most amount of people to watch at least for X amount of time? Because if you watch for X amount of time, we can claim that is a hit. You lose a lot of the creativity. You lose a lot of the. If you were to come up with an idea like Lost in Space now, let's imagine that it never existed. It would probably be, okay, where are you going to hold it on? If you have it on CBS, it's going to be, if you have it on, say, CBS or Paramount Plus, it's probably going to be a procedural. If you have it on something like Sci-Fi Channel, it's going to be probably a little bit like The Expanse. If you're going to have it on the CW, you're going to get teens involved. You lose a little bit. The great thing about that golden age from 64 to 72, producers did not give a flying F. It's like, I mean,
if you build it, they will come.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine now if Dan Curtis said, I want to do a gothic soap opera? A network suit would say, what the hell are you smoking, dude? Get out and play golf. Give me a real idea. The fact that Irwin Allen could, these are solid television. It's not Playhouse 90, it's not classic, but these are good, solid shows. The fact that Irwin Allen got away with it, and Gene Roddenberry, and all these other producers did stuff that really is memorable, I think speaks more to the relative freedom they had than the kind of the micromanaged creative output that we're seeing right now. And there's my old man moment. And scene.
I was listening to Eric Bischoff's podcast 83 Weeks, and he was telling about where they filmed the Steiner brothers car crash scene in wrestling. How the Outsiders ran the Steiners off the road. He was getting phone calls from the Turner execs saying, you can't put that on. No, you got to take that off. He's like, it's television. It's entertainment. He goes, we shot it as safe as possible. And they wanted it off, and it went on, but again, he was pushing for edgier content because again, Ted Turner asked him before Monday Night Nitro was launched. He said, how can I compete with Vince McMahon? And Eric Bischoff said, put a wrestling show on prime time on Monday night, which Ted Turner already had that idea in mind, but he wanted to hear the guy he hired to produce his wrestling show say the same thing. And I think when I look back at that era, that Attitude Era, it was the creation of the NWO at Bash at the Beach, Hogan turning heel, because nobody saw that coming. And I mean, nobody. And after that, when I would walk into a store during the 90s, Walmart, Kmart, Gabriel Brothers, wherever, there were whole aisles of clothing with nothing but wrestling t-shirts. I mean, even during football season, where I live, the Steelers are king. Nobody talked about the Steelers then. And that's, let me tell you, that doesn't happen. That hasn't happened since. That's how big that shit was.
I want to live in a world where there'd be nothing but aisles of firing line stuff. And you'd have John Kenneth Galbraith, t-shirts and things like that.
Yeah, your William F. Buckley action figure.
Yeah. Yeah. Every kid would have a clipboard and a chair.
God.
That was literally, I was watching Firing Line as a kid. I was a hellfire. But to get back to Lost in Space, and I know you're supposed to talk about Mark Goddard, is my idea, and God bless him. He had to be what's called the normative character, where Smith got to bounce all over the place, and John got to give heartwarming, but sometimes vaguely nonsensical speeches, a la Robert Reed and Brady Bunch. But Mark Goddard had to be, come on, Smith. He had to be that voice of reason, and you had to have that because you really couldn't get away with the immorality of Smith kind of ruling the day unquestioned. But if you just look at the immorality of Smith most of the time, you miss the real message of that character. And as one of the reasons I love that character, I was always surrounded by people who said, "Oh, why don't they just throw on an airlock? You don't have a show." And it's fine when John or Don show bravery, because we expect it. They're trained to do this. But like maybe every 5 or 6 episodes, Smith has a moment he doesn't let anybody see, but he has this moment of unbelievable bravery. But it's a Barnabas Collins style bravery. It's because he has to, because he doesn't have any other choice. Well, he does. He could just completely fold up, but he just closes his eyes, and it's like one of my favorite sayings: do the thing you're afraid of doing, and then you'll find the courage to do it. and that's Smith, and the beauty and he's a Falstaffian figure, the beauty and the tragedy of him is that he doesn't entirely learn, or does he? You know, and for me, the other characters are really sort of ancillary. They're to the side. This is a show about the kid every kid hopes they would be in that situation, Will Robinson, who is maybe the most honorable character on TV ever. He's just a hell of a guy. You know, I mean, I'm 52 and I want to grow up to be, you know, like 12-year-old Will Robinson, who, you know, his parents are honestly too busy with matters of survival to focus on the real dangers that are around. But Will has curiosity, and so he will press into that. And, you know, who are his real parents? Well, his real parents are these wonderful studies in opposites, not only with each other, but within themselves. You know, you have a theoretically mechanical man who is he's nothing but compassion. He is nothing but the right thing. And, you know, when Sarah Connor has that monologue about, you know, the Arnold, when he's working with young John Connor, he says, you know, it's a figure who's never going to scold him, who's always going to be there, who's never going to be drunk, who's always going to be in a productive mood at the very least, and how that's, you know, what she so needs in this world. And I can't help but think of the B9.
Oh.
And then on the other side, you've got Dr. Smith, who is, in theory, the worst of everyone. You know, he's cowardly and he's avaricious and he's greedy and gluttonous. He's, with the exception of lust, you know, he is all of the you know, he's at least 6 of the deadly sins. But when no one is looking, he is a brave, profoundly decent man when it counts. You know, so many people can be, you know, decent when everyone is looking, you know, but this is going to sound absurd, but, you know, Dr. Smith sometimes is the definition of Martin Luther King's definition of character. You know, he's the picture of Martin Luther King's definition of character. I think it was King who said, you know, character is who you are when nobody's looking. And Smith routinely does the right thing when nobody's looking. And I love that about him. And he will also always be there for Will. There's this great episode, I forget the title of it, but it has Hans Conried as this knight who's not really this knight. And I think it's Hans Conried. And, you know, Will is kind of let down when he realizes that this character's, you know, judgments, or not judgments, one of his character's statements about himself are not necessarily true. And he's just been kind of let down. I'm probably misinterpreting all of this stuff. And he knows that Smith is full of BS as well, and kind of confronts him about it. And Will's sitting down with a book, and, you know, Smith says, you know, where's your fanciful adventure books and all that? And he says, I'm too old for that. And he says, greatest lines in all the television, where Will says, you know, I'm getting too old for this stuff. And Smith just looks at him and says, Will, don't be in such a hurry to grow up. It really isn't worth it. And that, I love Star Trek, but there's not a moment in Star Trek that gets me like that.
No.
Not one.
Gordon,
Joe?
anything you want to add?
Well, I think because Lost in Space was meant to be a family show, I think it could get away with a lot more heartfelt moments like Patrick described.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I think it also speaks to, yeah, and I think part of it was that Mark Goddard as Don West was the big brother.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the status of the cast, because you had Guy Williams, who played Zorro, so he, he was a familiar heroic figure. June Lockhart was Lassie's mom and She-Wolf of London. You had Bill Mumy was on the Twilight Zone sending people to the cornfield. Jonathan Harris had developed a really strong stage, and on TV he did play in an episode of Twilight Zone. He did play a villain. I think Angela Cartwright was in The Sound of Music, or is that Veronica Cartwright?
And no, she was in and she was on the Danny Thomas show, wasn't she, Patrick?
You're right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Marta Kristen, I think, had been like a model, successful actress. So you need someone who can play that kind of, I think Williams was at a point where it's like, I'll just be the smart father. I don't need to be, wearing a mask and wielding a saber. But you need someone who could be the big brother. And the big brother's the guy who can tell everyone where to go off. The big brother's the one who's making sure that the parents can get what they need. He's got their back. And Mark Goddard had that. He had that wonderful, he was never, I think the only person he was ever really mean to was Dr. Schmidt, but it was always in a, look, I know this guy's going to do this again, but I better say this now because nobody else is going to. And I think that helped with the series because this series could have easily been the Star Trek Voyager of the 1960s. It could have been pointless. It could have been literally a reboot. And I think the fact that it came at a time when, like, every show had to be family friendly. You could not do The Walking Dead in the 1960s, and thank God, because that show blows chunks. You couldn't do Game of Thrones in the 60s, and I'm sorry, and that show sucks ass. I'm sorry.
I've never seen it.
Patrick, you actually have. It was made in the 1970s by the BBC and called I, Claudius.
God,
that was so good. Oh my
greatest
God.
television show ever. Jewel, we keep telling you. It is, I think it's the greatest television series ever made.
It's so good.
It's really great. It's like 12 episodes, and it's
The
over.
actors.
I think part of why we all remember this is that TV at the time, I don't want to say it was innocent, but it was more, you could tell that there wasn't an agenda other than let's make a good show and hope we get it in the ratings.
Yeah.
Jewel, can I add some stuff what Patrick was saying? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I think Patrick is really showing this show brings up a lot of emotion. And so thank you for that. There was an episode, I'm going to try to make it quick. Few points. There was a whole episode called The Timekeeper. And it's when Smith
that episode. That to me is really the final episode of the series.
Yeah. He and the robot, he got back to Earth using this time machine. But what he found out, what he was told, is if you don't go on that ship by the timekeeper, the Robinsons and Major West are going to hit a meteor in 3 months and they're all going to die. And he made the decision. He couldn't do it. He couldn't because they become his de facto family. He and the robot were nanny to the kids. Patrick's spot on. They were the nanny to those kids. And he started crying. And I can't do it. And he finagled his way back on the ship, and so that, the Robinsons survived, but he had to leave Earth again. But he gave that up for his family because they really were his family. And what Patrick was saying about wanting to be Will Robinson, Patrick, I used to have dreams as a 4 or 5-year-old being on that ship in the silver space suit with Bill Mumy. It was, Joel, I can't explain it. Being a kid then, it is so ingrained in my psyche, this show. And it's the God honest truth. And Mark Goddard, God bless him, had a handle on it. He said, this show reminds everybody of family and home. That is a Mark Goddard quote. And in real life, Mark Goddard's funeral was yesterday, and he has talked about his relationship with Mark. Well, the whole cast was a family. I mean, they were very close through all the years, even after the show was over. And Mark Goddard used to take him in his sports car and race around. There's a picture on Bill Mumy's Facebook page showing him in that car with Mark Goddard. So he really was his big brother in a lot of ways. And
he was an only child, so that's a big deal.
I mean, it's really. And Bill Mumy who was one of his best friends, Jonathan Harris, through the end of Jonathan Harris. Because I think Bill Mumy, I think there were, I don't quote me on this, but I think that there was, Jonathan Harris had a son, but I think that relationship was complicated, and I think Bill Mumy became Jonathan Harris's de facto son. They were close till the day Jonathan Harris died. You can't make this up. You can't fake it. They really were in real life very close people. So just spot on to y'all.
I love that episode
Yes.
that you're talking about. And it's like the second or third to last episode, I think, of the series. And I'm fairly certain it's towards the end.
It's towards the end.
If they had, I think, if Irwin had thought a little bit more along these lines, because I think they found out at the last minute they weren't getting a 4th season. That really is the proper episode to have at the end of the series, because, they wind up in the situation they wind up in because of Zachary Smith. And, really what we're looking at is about the redemption of Zachary Smith, throughout the whole thing. And that moment, I remember even seeing that when I was a kid, and it always that and Space Primevals, the plot of Space Primevals doesn't matter to me at all. It's those last scenes in the incarceration rock area, where they're calling each other by their first names, and Smith is, I think, very seriously using terms like best friend, and because I suspect that of course Smith is a mess of vices, and yet I think there's a real part of Smith that looks at someone like Don West and thinks, God, I wish I could be like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he manages to find some of that. And Don West brings out the best in everyone.
In a lighter sense, and I wanted to mention this now, thank God it wasn't the last episode, but it was the Great Vegetable Rebellion, which got June Lockhart and Guy Williams kicked off the lot for 3 weeks because they kept cracking up. If you watch that, and I know it's hard to watch, 2 things. Mark Goddard had to turn like this because he kept cracking up, but he got through it. And what's really interesting, we've talked about Dark Shadows and how the writers were burning out. They put that when they put that script into Jonathan Harris's slot, and he started reading it, he confronted Peter Packard and said, "What is this?" He said, "We've run out of ideas." They were so burned out. And I just wanted to be, there was a little Dark Shadows parallel, but go back and look at Great Vegetable Rebellion, because poor Mark Goddard's going like this, towards the end of the episode, because he's trying to maintain not laughing.
Imagine Stanley Adams as Tybor in the Judah Zachary box. You combine them.
Oh, that was a toughie. Junkyard Space was the last one, so that was a little better.
Yeah.
So,
but then when Barnabas would get back to 1971, I guess, and he and Joy would be talking about how comfortable the modern clothes are and so on, and Barnabas would reach into his pocket and just pull out a little baby carrot and wonder, is it really over? Is it ever really over?
oh God.
Yeah, or you'd have Jonathan Harris come in as Barnabas's wacky roommate Zachary, when it would be, "Oh, you vampiric villain, how dare you?" and Barnabas would be like, I must get rid of this person. He is annoying. Willie, go make me a man out of tin plates and foil and put Christmas tree lights in his head. And
now you bring on Jonathan Harris as Hieronymus Blair, Nicholas's uncle, and you got a stew going.
Oh.
He would have been great. He would have fit right in the cast, because he basically was a cross between Humbert Allen Estrado and Louis Edmonds.
Mm-hmm.
I have some questions for you guys. If you could have had Mark Goddard in any role throughout the 70s, what would it have been?
Han Solo.
I was thinking the same thing.
Han Solo. Holy cow, then that movie would have been good. Then it would have been a success. It would have made sense.
Yeah, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I a lot of alternate Han Solos. The other one is Elvis. If Swifty Lazar had gotten his hands on Elvis and gotten him away from Colonel Tom and gotten him a real doctor to deal with his stomach problems instead of this crazy Greek living in the back of Graceland in a double wide, Elvis would have gotten cleaned up, and he would have made a hell of a Han Solo. Wow, that you make that movie with with Kurt Russell as Luke, who tried out for the part of Luke. Kurt Russell as Luke, Toshiro Mifune as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Orson Welles is the voice of Darth Vader, if not the body, and Elvis Presley as the Beaver. As Aunt Beru. Han Solo, and Roddy McDowell's the voice of C-3PO. What a movie! What a great and Cindy Williams, the intended Princess Leia.
Really, really interesting.
Hell of a movie.
And don't underestimate Mark Goddard. And I mentioned it a little bit last week out of context with Laura Parker. But Joel, one of the best, and I remember seeing it. Some of Mark Goddard's best work where it was in one of the best episodes of the series, which was Antimatter Man. Yeah, that by far, that's when the show really went back to its roots, and it was. Have you ever seen it, Joel?
I saw the episode today. It was really good.
Okay, I'm so glad you saw that. Great work. Go ahead.
No, that was one of the episodes I suggested to Jewel to prep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I watched both episodes today. But Mark Goddard, hell of an actor. That's the one thing I picked up from both episodes, and wasn't afraid to put on the work. Actors, there are actors today and actresses that probably will never get half the opportunity of what Mark got on Lost in Space.
Mark even steals the Lost in Space movie. It's like I'm watching him in the Lost in Space movie. He looks great. And I'm thinking, why am I not seeing him? Why is he, because you can, if you watch that movie, I don't recommend that you do, but if you watch that movie, it's clear where the Jonathan Harris part would have been. I think it's like Spider Smith or something like that, this sort of weird, warped, older version of Smith, because they had a cameo, and Harris said, I don't do cameos. And unlike the woman of size on the Jardiance ads, whose last name is Colin, who does do cameos, and for $25, she can wish you a happy birthday, dancing only with her hands. She just does a lot of this.
And for $10, she'll sing you happy birthday in person and other things.
Yeah. If we can get a sitcom with her and Flo from those other ads, Natalie Palmity's, I think is her name. You got a series. I'll watch that. My God, where did I go wrong? But back to Mark Goddard.
You got a few hours, because I can tell you.
That's all. That's all. And when they talk about the sort of perennial problems that the Jardiance brings on, that's gangrene, right? Mm-hmm. That's what in her dance number. That's what she's kind of just brushing off to the side. I'm just saying.
Joel, can I say a few words as Mark Goddard as a person? Well, I meant other than being an actor, but because I don't know when we're going to wind this up, but I did want to say he was a very interesting human being. No, that wasn't a slam on you, Patrick, I promise.
But you did. That's where this would have ended.
But what I wanted to say is, in the context where I'm seeing my parents' generation disappear, because he was only 2 years younger than my mom, and he actually attended the same college as my dad, which is College of the Holy Cross. He was a little younger than my dad. Mark Goddard played baseball. My dad played football. But when Mark Goddard retired from acting, he went back to school and he became a teacher in special education. So he was pretty as he looked, as the old saying goes. I mean, to have this whole second career of giving and, in special education, my hat's off to him. And all these cast members did their thing after the show. But Mark Goddard as a person, nobody's perfect. But what a second career giving career that he had. And like I said, him and Bill Mumy, that when Bill knew that he was going to be the last time, they said to each other on the phone, "I love you." And, that's what he's going to be remembered for, along with being the dashing, handsome, Patrick likes to use a word, and I agree with him, virile Major Don West. He's going to be remembered for being a special teacher in special education. And I just think, going back to Gordon, we're not going to see this ever again. We're not going to see this. And we all know what this is. We're never going to see it like this ever again. And my hat's off and my thoughts to his family and to his life. And just thank you, for what you gave us.
If you guys could pick a studio to let do another Lost in Space, who would it be? What studio would it be?
Studio. I can tell you what I would do with a modern Lost in Space series, but I don't know about a studio. I mean, honestly, maybe Pixar, but the Pixar that did The Incredibles, for me, Lost in Space, without turning it into some kind of weird nostalgia thing, has to have an emphasis on a very special kind of comedy, because ultimately it's kind of a comedy adventure series. If you really look at, you know, how many scenes are devoted to Smith and the robot and Will, it has to be about the brightest, chromiest, shiniest, coolest future. It has to be a triumph of production design, and it has to be a production design without being, you know, too retro, that nevertheless is just a wonderful, pretty gleaming future. You know, a lot sort of like Strange New Worlds looks. It has to have velour. It has to have Mylar jumpsuits. And it has to be, you know, you cannot stray far from the B9 design.
Yeah.
That's crucial. You cannot stray from the Jupiter 2 design. They keep wanting to redesign the Jupiter 2. Leave the fucking Jupiter 2 alone. It is one of the, I mean, it's like saying, no more nacelles on the Enterprise or something like that. No, it's a very specific shape. It is as much a character as anyone else. John Robinson does not have a chip on his shoulder. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
That you look up to. You know, Don West is your feisty older brother, who always is going to have your back. He may give you a hard time behind closed doors and say, "Now, what were you thinking there?" But you know, when you are, you know, staring down Warren Oates or whatever, he's in your corner. He is in your corner, and you know, and you have to have a tremendous actor, and I would say a coded actor, as Dr. Smith, because you know Dr. Smith also embodies he embodies the worst of masculine and feminine, and that's the Jewel won't, he can't take it anymore. Well, Jewel, I'm telling the truth, and
we finally broke Jewel.
We broke him.
Finally
It took us forever, but we did it.
Yes.
Go
us.
Those are the things that I think you need. I remember in the 90s when I realized the future went away, there was like the best news possible. 1993 TV Guide made an announcement that a Lost in Space remake movie was being made with, and I'm not joking here because it was a brilliant piece of casting, Richard goddamn Simmons as Dr. Smith was suggested. And I just levitated out of my chair. And all of my friends who are Lost in Space fans, we just went, oh my God, that's perfect. He is, because, you know, he could have that snarl, but which was rare, but you could see a little bit of it. But he also had such an enormous heart, and still does. And that character with the hair, but in the turtleneck, but that to me was like, maybe there is a God. And when that went away, I was like, well, there goes the future.
Yeah.
Again.
Gordon, who would you?
I wouldn't. I'd point people to the original. And no, it's not a cop out, because we do franchises to death. I would rather people find the original, and I wouldn't want to hear anything about, oh, it's too dated, it's this, it's that. It's like, you know what? If you could sit through an episode of Star Trek, you can sit through an episode of this. You don't need fancy special effects. You don't need mini arcs, and you don't need the level of fans who are going to complain that, oh, they didn't do it like this, and blah, blah, and about continuity. Those people are evil. Yeah, I would just say the only thing that's wrong with Lost in Space, no werewolves.
Gordon, I agree with you. The one thing I will add, though, and Strange New Worlds is one of the things that gives me hope on this. Mandalorian is one of the things that gives me hope on this, is that in those instances, you have people who really profoundly understand why the source material worked. And they basically said, 3 years wasn't enough. and we're going to give you more because we want more. If someone can do that, not different, not better, not anything like that, and not even imitative, but we're going to do more. It's been 50 years since Star Trek. Let's do some more. It's been 40 years since Star Wars. Let's do some more Star Wars for real. And hence Mandalorian, which I think is a delightful series. I love that show.
Don, who would you pick studio to do Lost in Space?
Well, I'd stay away from David Zaslav, that's for sure.
Who's David Zaslav?
He's the guy that head of Warner Brothers Discovery that tried to dismantle TCM and just bulldoze the backlot of Warner's, which they demoed the Bewitched House, the Partridge Family House, the Father's Knows Best House, I think. Anyway, I don't know. You know what, Jewel? I think, well, it doesn't exist anymore, but damn it, I'd say go back to the 20th Century Fox, but it doesn't. Didn't Disney buy 20th Century Fox? Yeah. I'd maybe go back to that studio, but it's a toughie. It's really a toughie, Joel. But I maybe go back to the original studio.
The producers I would get. I get the people who did and are doing Frasier. Something tells me they just get it.
Paramount, I mean.
Well, no, I mean that studios. It's just an organizational body, but those specific producers, the other Christopher Lloyd, and I think they would do a hell of a job. Hey, Kelsey Grammer would make a magnificent Dr. Smith.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen. I watched the first episode of the new Frasier. It was nice to see a sitcom again. It really, it's like they managed to find a likable ensemble who are recognizable stock figures, but ones, even though you recognize them, maybe you haven't seen them before. And there's just something about the crispness of that show and that writing that they are people I would trust in a heartbeat to get that flavor.
Yeah, it's also good to watch a multi-camera comedy show and not the typical, okay, comedy scene, cut away to reaction. Comedy scene, cut away to reaction.
It's beautifully theatrical.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go to hell right now.
Good. Bye.
I swear, if it's a wrestling producing thing.
No, not at all. My studio selection is a studio that's never done live action, but everything they've ever done from an anime standpoint or a cartoon standpoint has been pure heart and soul and pure great storytelling and character telling. And that would be Studio Ghibli. I would put Lost in Space in their hands.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, why not? Sure.
They know how to touch an audience, especially a young audience to boot.
Well, as I was saying, Brad Bird, I think, would be the man only made the Iron Giant. I mean, what's that but a big robot movie?
Right. Yep. Absolutely. I have no more questions for you guys. Is there anything anybody wants to add before we get on out of here?
This was great. This was really, Jewel, you don't have to do these things. And it was really nice that you did. I really mean that.
Thank you. By the way, did you guys watch 804 for tomorrow night?
Not yet.
Not yet, but I will.
Joel, I just want to do a quick shout out to an element of the show that we haven't talked about, and that's the music.
Oh,
and I just want to say something real quick. I know it's late, but one of the things that Irwin Allen would do, he did this a lot on Time Tunnel, is use stock footage from 20th Century Fox. He was really good at that. But in this show, we had stock music to I think my favorite movie soundtrack composer, and that's Bernard Herrmann, who is the master. So we've got We've got stuff that came in from The Day the Earth Stood Still, which still stands the test of time. And one of my favorites themes is the jetpack theme, which is from Beneath the 12-mile reef. And so he brought in all this Bernard Herrmann. But what's interesting, whose career was just starting out was John Williams.
Johnny.
So Johnny Williams. So you had this intersect, and like Dark Shadows, the music was so integral to this show. Going back and watching parts of Reluctant Stowaway, I went, oh my God, this music is so spot on. It's like, I know it's cliche, but it's a character. But that Bernard Herrmann music was just so spot on. And anyway, I just thank you for letting me mention that, because it's really an important element.
Who is it? Herman Stein? Is he who wrote the family theme?
Oh yeah, that's one of the great themes of the show. Yeah,
and that is the most heartwarming piece of music ever. It's impossible to hear it without bursting into tears. That's why I put it under that Count Petofi.
Yeah, that was genius. Oh my God,
because that's a Smith Will scene. Totally. I mean, Count Petofi, I can't help but love, because he's Dr. Smith. Just in a very different situation. No matter how much evil he does, you just love him. At least I do.
If you want proof that Studio Ghibli could do it, go watch the movie Castle in the Sky.
All right, I will.
Writing that down.
Really, really good. But so tomorrow, 9:45, is it got good for you guys, Jordan?
Mm-hmm.
Smells good.
Okay, 8:04. A certain word gets mentioned in that episode. I'll let you guys watch it.
Jewel, I think the fact that you're so excited about a naughty word in a 1960s soap opera, that concerns me.
It gives me hope.
You clearly haven't heard my wife speak when we're off camera, have you? Anyway.
No, Jewel, sorry. No.
Your wife is a wonderful woman. Butter would not melt in her mouth.
I grew up in a different era than you guys, so I'm used to like hearing sultry things on television. For God's sakes, I watched the Chucky series. That's on USA.
Oh, you poor dude. That's just okay. Yeah, that's a red flag right there.
There's a Chucky series. I didn't know this.
Yeah, it's on Peacock. And the other reason I know it's on Peacock is that I see the listing for it. I have the free one because I'm always, my comfort watching is Law and Order Criminal Intent.
It's on the USA Network. You can watch it on there too. You don't have to watch it.
Yeah, but why would I want to? Why would anyone want to watch a Chucky series? It's like Chucky is the lamest horror creature. Because all you need is like a lighter and like hairspray. Chucky comes running up to you. You take the like the lighter, hit the hairspray. You set Chucky on fire. It's all over. He's a doll.
Put him in the toilet. Give him a swirly to kill him off. Why not? Anyway.
You grab his leg and you throw him in a wood chipper. There you go.
I've never seen a Chucky anything.
Oh my God!
Never.
You know what?
Seen it.
So you've never been to Chuck E. Cheese?
A horrible person took me to Chuck E. Cheese on my 30th birthday, fooling me into thinking it was going to be a 5.
I'm sorry about that, Patrick. I should have been clear with you about that.
Oh, no. Really, they blindfolded me. They had me wear a suit. And then they thought it would be fun and whimsical, and I was just so unbelievably PO'd.
So there weren't even like, sexy fun times afterwards.
No, I made them take me to an Indian restaurant. I was not gonna deal. No, I was just like, I think I went on a hunger strike. I was so ticked off. If they had said we're taking you to Chuck E. Cheese on your birthday, it's like, okay. But yeah, no way.
I'm Jules Sains. That's Patrick McCray. That's Gordon Dymowski. That's Don Schmidt. First of all, thank you, gentlemen. This was a lot of fun and educational to boot.
And God bless you, Mark.
Yeah.
Wherever you are.
Rest in peace.
Godspeed.
God bless to the late Mark Goddard. R.I.P. brother. Guys, have a good night. See you tomorrow.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Bye.